showing that it's recording. So if we are, now is the time to start.
There we go.
All right, before we completely forget. So for those of you on the recording who are just joining us, welcome to an Employee Reports at MSD Now What? I'm Tova Larson. I'm joined by Sarah Hobbs. We're a tag team of health and safety consultant and ergonomist, and we are so excited that you are joining us, even if it's far into the future. All right, so safety connection goals. What's a safety connection? It is an opportunity to stay in touch with your industry peers, to talk about hot topics. I think this is qualifies as a hot topic, but it's also a great opportunity to exchange best practices and ideas. So we're going to be looking for ideas from you as much as you are from us. And it's about learning, sharing, and discovering what's of value to you. We may be talking about something you go, well, but we don't haul like massive boxes, or we don't have a forklift. That's totally fine. At the end of the day, it's really about picking out those nuggets of gold that you think are going to be easily translatable into your own work context. So we're starting right off with a poll question. Emily, if you can pop that up. We've got our first poll. Rate your current musculoskeletal disorder investigations. Are you awesome, where you focus on process and engineering-based recommendations? Are you meh? We seem to lead to a lot of retrain worker, but you're still investigating. We report them, but we don't investigate them. They're just a cost of doing business. Or what MSDs? If someone reports aches and pains, we just tell them to go back to work. You can go ahead and submit your responses. I'm going to pop up the results here. 18% who've already responded have said that they are already awesome. And so if you picked that already awesome box, feel free as we go through the course to share some of the things you think you're doing well. Those are great opportunities for us to learn, for everyone to learn from you. This is definitely a two-way learning street here. 50% said they figured that they were meh. 15% said they report them, but they don't investigate them. And I would say that's actually a lot more common maybe than the numbers here on the program really indicate. I have lots of places that they just go, oh, well, we'll fill in a WSIB, and we're like, that's all that there is to it. They gather a bit of pertinent information, but they investigate for the purposes perhaps of filling in the form. They don't actually do it to really learn anything or change anything from it. And that's not quite where we're going. 34% said they're already awesome. So I'm impressed. 6% have said that they tend not to get the reporting either. So they have staff that are just encouraged to go back to work. So food for thought. I am going to talk a little bit about the investigative process, and then we're going to pass it off to Sarah. So what are we going to be doing here in our program today? We're going to be covering all of those key steps of an investigation. We're going to start with recognizing and responding, those early moments, getting help for your musculoskeletal disorder. We're then going to talk about reporting, things like Form 7, disabling injury, legal reporting requirements. We are going to be talking about it in the context of the province of Ontario. So if you are joining us from Ontario, all of the rest of this is still super relevant to you. But if we're talking about like Form 7's WSIB, obviously your province is going to have its own version of this. Collecting information, we'll talk about where you get your information, and then we'll talk about what to do with it, which is analyzing and finding contributing factors. Then we'll discuss developing strong recommendations based on ergonomic principles and following up to make sure your changes are effective. Oh, I don't really see an answer that fits. If someone has a problem, we ask, what is it? We work around it. That's a great start. That tells me that you're gathering information, you're accommodating, you're really trying to make it work. So, Dana, 2 thumbs up. So I'm going to pass the deck off to Sarah through this transition slide. So what do you think your biggest challenge is? And if the challenge doesn't show up on the slide, like we've got the poll, but you can also put it in the chat. What do you think your biggest challenge is in investigating musculoskeletal disorders? Do you think it's recognizing them? Is it the reporting side that you're just being like, I don't even know what to put on the report? We also have analyzing. Is it collecting the information because you don't know what to collect, or you don't know where to find it, or people don't give it to you? Is it analyzing it to find the root causes? Is it the recommendations because you're really reluctant maybe to, they focus on retraining or they're not implemented? Or my personal favorite, people will say, well, I don't want to make recommendations that are going to cost money. And then there's following up. Maybe you make some recommendations, but they don't stick, or you retrain people, but your training was never very good to begin with. I like to say if all you're doing is retraining your staff, one of two things has to be true. Either the training in the first place wasn't very good, or the task itself is flawed, or both. So let's see what some of our responses are. And Sarah, I can't see the responses anymore because I oh no, I do still have control. Wait a second.
They should be up in your chat, but our biggest Manitoba is recommending.
They're in the middle of my screen, not on the side of my screen. 24% said it was actually recommending and responding. Only 2% said it was reporting. 12% said collecting. 24% said analyzing, and 27% said recommending. 12 said following up. So we're going to see as we go through the course, you're going to get a chance to chat a little bit about that. And again, if you have specific things you're struggling with, feel free to put them in the chat now, and we'll be sure to discuss them through the program. Absolutely. So Sarah, tell us more about recognizing and responding to an MSD injury.
Love it. Thanks, Tova. So yeah, this is really the first step, right, folks? This is where we're really kicking off. Tova, if you don't mind hitting the next slide for me. Yep. Really just recognizing, responding, and making sure, of course, that you're all on the same kind of baseline in terms of where we want to start with. The really key thing when we talk about musculoskeletal disorders or MSDs is that there's really two different types, right? You can have a gradual, which is a very kind of common, I would say, in the work that I do, in the sense that it's a slow onset, which often means a slow recovery. And then you have some that are a bit more injury traumatic, very acute, a sudden event that happens. So we'll go through here kind of the list as to what to expect for both. So in terms of the one that you're going to see on the left-hand side, occupational disease, again, this is kind of coming on over time. There may be a delayed recognition, not necessarily just by the employer, but even by the employee themselves, right? There a lot of times when this first is kicking in, you're kind of like, is this a thing or did I just sleep funny for a couple of weeks, right? So there's often that, again, delayed recognition. Next, what you're going to see as well, sorry, Tova, it's a little slow on my end.
I said I'm clicking as like I'm
okay, no.
I'm clicking when I would be clicking because I can kind of hear your cadence, but yeah.
Thank you. It's my CARP internet. I always have a little chuckle on my rural internet.
I'll click early for you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Tova. So on the onset, when you see that on the other side, in terms of more of a traumatic or acute, again, this is a very distinct kind of injury moment time frame. It's very aware. It's very obvious when this happens. And again, this is a really key thing for not just the employee to understand or the employer, for everyone to understand, because this is where we're talking about, especially when it comes to Form 7, which we'll talk about, making sure that everyone's on the same page. When we talk about occupational disease and that side of MSDs, it's really coming back oftentimes to what we call the big three in ergonomics. That's force, posture, repetition. That can look like a lot of different things depending on the environment that you're working in, but they're oftentimes apparent in every single environment. Excessive force. Think, for example, someone who is an office worker, or maybe yourselves tuning into this webinar, the sheer force of our bums on seats for all day long, that's a type of force. Awkward posture, we see that throughout, right? Whether you're, again, hunched over a laptop at your kitchen dining table, or maybe you're reaching overhead to change a light bulb. Anything that takes you out of a neutral position, a neutral posture, we often term an awkward posture, right? Being in that neutral state is the easiest, happiest place for your muscles, your ligaments, all of your tissues to be working from. So it's the most efficient, it's the peak efficiency. Repetition, I think that one's kind of obvious, right? It's doing things over and over for an extended period of time often. Previous to having the MSD term, one of the common umbrella terms for these injuries was an RSI, or a repetitive strain injury. That may be something that you still hear today. really alluding to the fact that that repetition, repeated movement is a cause for injury. And a lot of times we see that in the sports world too, right? There's a big common thing right now with big players and load management. So a lot of times sitting star players in order to give them that extra time to recover from all the repetitive game schedule, whatever it is that they're doing. So couple that repetition with a long task duration, right? Not giving you a lot of time to recover just means that those muscles are working without that refreshment time. On the flip side, when we look at the traumatic, the acute side, we often have that kind of safety category hazards that Tova had mentioned at the top, right? So you've got your slips, trips, you've got your falls, you've got your struck bys, your lacerations. And again, as Tova mentioned, it's about taking that mindset that a lot of times our safety professionals are really good at. They're good at investigating those, but how do we take it into that little bit new realm of the MSD side of things? So we've got some great examples here for the occupational side. Occupational disease could be a strained muscle from lifting, right? You're doing that repeatedly, maybe 4 times a day for 10, 15, 14, 15, 16, 17 years, right? You could have forearm tendonitis from gripping. That could be a tool, that could be a mouse. Discs, we really need to protect our discs in our spinal column. We see that a lot, especially in a material handling environment, where you may have a herniated or an irritated disc, right? Depending on the movements that you're doing. On more of the traumatic side, so again, these still apply. But these could be, for example, a torn muscle. So if you're kind of at a nip point, that could be contact with machinery, right? That's a certain possible outcome. You could have a broken bone from a forklift strike, right? The consistent thing with this is that they're very sudden, obvious events, right? A cut tendon from a box opener, or you could have a spinal fracture with a fall from height. Okay, so really trying to give you that distinction between gradual onset versus very sudden onset. So in terms of signs and symptoms, this is something that, again, your signs are more of the behavior, something that you might be able to see or notice as a coworker or as a supervisor walking by. Symptoms are kind of the things that the person is feeling, right? So these are very common ones that we see with MSDs. Pain, sometimes that can be just as is, just standing chilling, right? And you have some pain. Sometimes that can be with or without movement, right? So it looks differently depending on the injury. You might hear the worker or you yourself have felt that there's that protection to the area that's kind of nursing that area. Saying it hurts when they sneeze or cough, super common with a back injury. In fact, we really want to brace ourselves if you've ever had a back injury and you're doing something like sneezing or coughing. Little things can throw that off. Wearing something, so sometimes they're identifiers, right? There could be an elbow guard, a splint. You could have a back brace in certain situations. Using some awkward postures to do things, really because you're just trying to protect that area. Stiffness and swelling is also very common. I know we all feel this a little bit, to a degree, depending on the morning, but that difficulty of getting out of bed in the morning. If you're doing a lower level task and you're trying to stand up again, there's kind of that stiffness and that need to kind of shake things out. You'll often see people kind of massaging the area, rubbing the arm, rubbing the leg, wherever it's affected. Numbness and tingling, anytime you get into like the numbness, the tingling, the hot, the cold sensations, a lot of times that's your body saying that the nervous system is involved. Okay, so anytime you hear those cues, know that there's a correlation there. So you'll often see people kind of shaking out, especially if, say, for example, they've been holding a screwdriver for a long period of time or something like that. They'll kind of do that motion. Tenderness, so we tend to have slower, more restrictive movements. Again, there's that protection to the area, rubbing that kind of area, again, just due to that tenderness and discomfort. And then lastly, when it's weak and heavy, so just having difficulty moving that body part, difficulty completing activities, maybe dropping things, especially something as simple as like opening and closing a pickle jar or whatever your favorite jar is. A lot of times with wrist, forearm injuries, that can be a simple task, can be very difficult. Okay. And also one thing that Tova and I have talked about a lot too is that, a lot of these are work related, yes, but where it gets very tricky and difficult is that doing your day-to-day living tasks, right? Like opening your jar of pickles can become very difficult. So as hard as it is to do your day-to-day work tasks, it can also creep into your day-to-day life as well. So in terms of first moments, so for us as, you know, on the employer side or coworker side, the first
Yeah,
aid
well,
for
I got
sprains and
lost.
strains. Did you? Are you good?
Yeah, I'm good. I feel like I lost you, and then I think it turns out I was the one that got lost in the
Oh,
ether. One thing that I found, I have had tennis elbow, by the way, and the thing I found the hardest to do was floss my teeth. Like,
yeah,
ooh,
I
not
know.
easy, not
Simple
fun.
things. I know, simple
Simple,
things.
simple
Yeah,
things, or like you're dropping stuff. You're like, why do I not have any grip strength? And
I
that
know.
was why.
That's it. No, that's it. And I find that's a lot of time when people clue in that, okay, maybe there is something going on here because something very simple that should be simple is no longer simple. So in terms of that first aid approach, so again, this is us kind of bringing it back to, we're all really good at a safety standpoint of someone's had a slip and a trip and we're first aid, we've got this, we've been trained, we know, you know, our first response, what we need to do. But with sprains and strains, it looks a little bit different. So very hopefully obvious. You want to discontinue the task that provokes pain, right? You want to rest. You want to probably put warm compress on the area, especially if we're talking stiffness and swelling. There's an extensive amount of swelling, maybe icing and repeating ice and hot for 10 on, 20 on. Finding positions of comfort too. Sometimes that's elevating the legs, sometimes that's resting. Major back injuries, a lot of times that's a completely, you know, lying down supine position. Depends on the injury. Seeking that medical attention, getting the proper documentation as well, because there will likely be a Form 8 required in terms of the healthcare side, the practitioner side, and coming up with a little bit of a treatment plan. You may have heard over the years of the RICE method, right? For that kind of quick first aid, rest, ice, compress, elevate. More of a newer approach now is the MEAT acronym. So having that gentle movement, right? Kind of an active recovery where possible. Exercise, taking your Tylenol, your Advil as needed, and seeking medical treatment. Okay, so that's a quick acronym to remember. In terms of accommodations, so this is something we're going to chat a little bit further on when it comes to completing like a Form 7. But having a physical demands analysis or a physical demands description really of the tasks that the individual is completing or the overall job is very, very effective to understand the technical details to the job and really what is needed from the worker to complete that job. How many lifts? What's the height of the lift? What's the weight of the box or the object that they're lifting? Taking that and pairing it ideally with a functional abilities form if needed. So there's an evaluation that can be done by healthcare practitioners where they'll evaluate where the worker is at, what they're safely able to do in terms of a physical movement. And then really you want to pair that ideally with your PDD or your PDA to make sure that the tasks that the employee is doing can be done within their limitations. And then of course, having that communication across the whole piece, the whole spectrum. Okay, so in terms of reporting the injury, I'm going to throw it over to you, I think, here soon, Tova. Oh, sorry, we still got a couple more here. Okay, so in terms of your MSD stages, there are 3 stages. This is something that we talk a lot about. And if any of you have sat in on our CERT sessions, this is something that we really, really like to highlight. And again, this is something that I think it's important for both the employer and the employee to be aware of this and understand. You want to be on the same kind of page when it comes to these injuries, where they fall, how far along the scale, how far along the spectrum. So stage 1 is very early onset. Okay, so it's not affecting jobs and performance at this point, but it's definitely kind of been creeping around for some weeks, months at this point in time. There aren't really visible signs. So again, if you're not in constant communication with the employee, you probably would not know that anything's going on. But very important to note at stage 1 that treatment, if it's sought at that time, you know, physio, massage, whatever the treatment of choice, it's very, very reversible. Okay, so obviously the ideal stage to start seeking treatment. Stage 2, we're getting into a little bit more aches and pains, and we're starting to see that the individual's sleep is affected. Okay, so as an ergonomist, when I'm chatting with folks and doing assessments, and you know they may be on the stage here, I often ask them how their sleep is, because if any of you have ever had an injury, you're probably aware that, you know, if it's a bad injury, it's probably preventing you from falling asleep at night, or it's also keeping you up and waking you up in the middle of the night. Okay, so certainly some issues and discomfort with that. We're talking kind of months at this point. We're starting to see a decrease in job performance. Again, that could be just skipping certain tasks because they prove uncomfortable, or it could be just slower production rates because we're having to move a little bit slower. Treatment at this stage, it's difficult and it's a slower recovery. When we jump over to stage 3, we're talking long-term now. Okay, so probably the person is in chronic long-term pain. They may already be on short-term or long-term disability. We're talking months to years. We might even be looking at modified duties at the job. So often there are certainly visible signs. This person could have a brace, they could have a limp, they could be walking with a cane. And as we progress through these stages, there's a greater risk of permanent damage. So again, if we're talking about a treatment plan, best case scenario is to have them treated as early as possible in order to get back to their normal as soon as possible. Okay. And then I think final slide here, Tova, before I pass it over. So last poll question for this section, folks. What stage in your organization do you find that staff are reporting MSDs? So stage 0, that could be before the MSD even starts. You guys are super on the ball, constant communication. Stage 1, as soon as symptoms start. Stage 2, once they're starting to see a little bit of a decline in the job performance. And then stage 3, when they're completely unable to perform job duties. Okay, so just give us a sense. I see a couple of them starting to roll in here. Looks like our leads are stage 2 and 3. And I have to say, in my experience on my kind of part of this role, is that I'm usually seeing people at the stage 2s and the stage 3s, right? A lot of times us as humans, we don't want to bring anything up. We don't want to seem weak or incapable of doing our job. So we tend to leave it until it gets really, really bad. And unfortunately, that's the stage 2 and the stage 3, which is looking consistent with what you folks are saying. So we've got about 3% at stage 0. Go get them, stage 0. 25 at stage 1, and then 33 and 37 at stage 2 and stage 3. So really, really good that you're thinking of that, because I want you to keep that in mind as we're going through here about maybe some ways that you could jump from a stage 3 to even a stage 2 at your organization, or stage 2 to a stage 1. What are some ways that you can open that communication, that conversation piece? Thanks, team, for responding.
For sure. And, you know, when we think about somebody now being unable to perform their job duties, they're at a place where you often are no longer in a position where modified is going to be enough. If you start getting into identifying these when the symptoms start, or when they're starting to see those performance decreases, you're a lot more likely to be able to keep that worker in the workplace while they recover. Once they've hit stage 3, there is a possibility also of permanent long-term damage, where they either will take a very long time to recover. They may never fully recover. And they're probably going to be out of your workplace for an extended period of time to do that. And Sarah, tell us a little bit more about completing our Form 7. So for those of you that are joining us from outside of Ontario, what is a Form 7? In the province of Ontario, when you are reporting an injury to WSIB, the Workplace Safety Insurance Board.
Too many WS acronyms.
There are so many acronyms here. Anyway, so to WSIB, which is our version of the workers' compensation system, there are 3 forms. There's the Form 6 that's filled out by the worker themselves on what they think happened. There's the Form 7 that's filled out by the employer, and there's Form 8 that's filled out by the doctor. Most often when a WSIB claim is initiated, especially for MSDs, less so for traumatic injuries, but for MSDs, it's pretty frequently that the doctor fills out their form first. Somebody goes to the doctor and say, hey, doc, I've got this problem, blah, blah, blah. I'm dropping things. I don't know what's going on. And the doctor says, oh, hey, so it turns out you have tennis elbow. And so the doctor then fills out their form, and that's sent to WSIB, which triggers the claim process, partly because that doctor is then paid by WSIB for that visit. That becomes a medical care cost to the system. And that triggers the need for the employer and the worker to fill out their form. Now, the worker form, very simple. The employer form, that's the one where, as an organization, you need to include some details so that WSIB can get a sense of what's going on here. And one of the big challenges is lots of folks will say, well, because we didn't have a distinct moment of ouch, what do we put on the form? How do we fill this out for something that comes on over time? Would fibromyalgia be considered a form of MSD? Yeah, that could be. When we think about, we tend to talk about working alone. I think it was about the previous one. Fibromyalgia, I don't know that it is classed as an MSD because it doesn't tend to have work-related causes as much as it tends to be a personal medical condition. We don't honestly know that much about what, in fact, is the underlying biological cause for fibromyalgia, but we do know that it's very, very real as a disorder. And you can certainly have someone who's experiencing fibromyalgia where their personal medical condition is making them more susceptible to develop MSDs that are work-related. So it becomes much more important to be able to provide appropriate accommodations for that person from a preventive standpoint, from an accommodation of a person with a disability standpoint, to really set them up to be successful in their work. And I'm sure Sarah can cover that a little bit more when she hops in here to talk about Form 7s. Passing it off to Sarah.
Thanks, Tova. And yeah, you nailed it. So not necessarily one that we would, categorize underneath the umbrella of MSDs, but certainly some implications and something that from an accommodation standpoint, I've seen many, many folks over the years that whether it's office, industrial setting, that there are just a few different types of equipment pieces that we can bring in to make sure that that person's a little bit more comfortable. So yeah, hopefully that helps. So in terms of the Form 7, a couple things that you want to keep in mind. First off the bat, when we talk about this kind of first aid and first response, making sure that you actually do the Form 7 first off. There are some significant fines if you don't, but within 3 days of learning of the injury, and you want it to be submitted to the WSIB within 7. On that, there are some key things that you want to include in the form. Part of that is, again, understanding the full story and understanding whether it falls under that gradual onset of injury or something that's a little bit more traumatic and sudden. And you're going to notice in the form that there are dates to be filled out. So again, sometimes there's the date where you've actually learned of the injury, and then there's, maybe the fact that the employee has been experiencing it for a long period of time, but they didn't report it to you until January 29th of 2024. So it just depends, but as much of that story as you can include, great. Tova, can you flip through if you haven't already? It's, again, sorry, slow on my end. There we go. So from the material handling standpoint, so again, thinking more of a bit more of an industrial workplace, typically, some data, so to speak, that you may want to include. So again, what were they lifting? What was the frequency of that lift? What was the posture? Were they working overhead? Were they working down low? If you have as much of this detail as you have to include, great. And again, all the more reason that I really plug having a physical demands description done for your jobs, especially in the material handling environment, because a lot of these questions, factors are expected to be provided. If you do have a physical demands description already completed, you can absolutely attach that to the Form 7. It's encouraged, and that will just help build the bigger picture. On the flip side, so if we're looking more of an office environment, including details of the workstation, right? So what kind of equipment are they using? Are they doing a lot of mousing, typing, keying, all of that? Again, just key things to include. When we talk again about the Form 7, like I said, attaching the physical demands description if you have it. As I mentioned as well, depending on where the individual falls in their injury, they may be encouraged to complete an FAE or a functional abilities evaluation. From that assessment, where they go through the range of motions, again, a lot of times they will ask, the healthcare practitioner will ask to have the physical demands description available so that they know the requirements from a task perspective of the job. And then really you're provided with the functional abilities form. Again, you hopefully have the physical demands description, and then it's a matter of trying to marry the two together to find out what that worker can do successfully in the workplace. Okay. And maybe that's a return to modified duties, but it really will help your return to work journey for that person. So if you're a high injury workplace, I definitely recommend having those handy. Okay.
Terrific. One thing I was going to quickly mention is, we think about the material handling side of things. That job description, that physical demands that Sarah was talking about, one of the biggest challenges is for things that come on over time because it doesn't have that distinctive ouch moment. It's really hard to say, well, what does this person lift? How high are the shelves that they're lifting? It's because you don't have that sort of, you can't just look and say, okay, this was the lift that did it. So how heavy was the box? So the question then becomes, what do they ordinarily lift? How many lifts do they do in a day? What are they doing on a regular basis? Because that's going to really cover the come on over time aspect. And that's going to be found in your physical demands analysis. And remember that some MSDs do in fact have a distinct ouch moment. That when we think about that, like somebody bent over, I've even seen it happen where someone went to pick up a piece of plastic wrap or plastic strap on the floor. They bend over, they go, oh no! And what do you end up with on the form? Person went to pick up plastic strap. But that was the last of their bending of the day. They went and lifted, 250-pound boxes. That strain, that, bodily reaction is building. And then they go to pick up that one small light object and go, oh no. So we do sometimes have some that have a distinct ouch moment, but that isn't necessarily the onset of the symptoms, nor is it necessarily the cause of the MSD. Sometimes that's just the final straw that broke the camel's back, I guess. I mean, proverbially, appropriate analogy given what I just said. That was the last thing that the body was able to tolerate. So in those situations, we want to really be asking, what was this person doing for the rest of the shift? What have they been doing all day? What were they doing yesterday, to get a sense of the trajectory of the injury? Or if it's something where they have that final one, again, what do they normally do? For these types of situations, if it's something that comes on over time and finally someone says, hey, I was diagnosed with tennis elbow, where they don't have that distinct moment to even look back from, the question then becomes, when did they first start feeling symptoms? They may have started feeling the symptoms weeks or even months earlier. They said, oh yeah, like I'd sometimes get like this weird tingly feeling in my fingers. Oh, when did that start happening? You know what? It started happening in like, I don't know, mid-November-ish. And then just pick a date. If that's when they tell you pick November 15th, mid-November-ish. And maybe they've been having it's a little bit, the term is sometimes colicky pain or colicky symptoms, where they have it and then it goes away and have it, sometimes it's here, sometimes it's not. We want to get to the beginning of that if we can. And so you're really going to be relying on that worker to sort of look back and notice that. You're not necessarily going to get the date exactly right. That's okay. It's also worth mentioning that the date of injury onset and the date of reporting may not be the same. So someone may bend over to pick up, they lift 50-pound boxes, they bend over to pick up the piece of plastic, they feel a little twinge, they don't really think much about it, and then they wake up the next morning and they're like not able to go to the bathroom and they're stuck in bed. That's not necessarily, and then maybe they call you, maybe your workplace is closed, it's a Saturday morning and they don't call you until Monday morning. The trajectory was, task. First symptom, first major symptom that caused them to actually realize there's something wrong, report. So there can be a lot of moving around in terms of when things are reported, when they are versus when they occur in the MSD world. Which brings us to reporting requirements. Do we need to report musculoskeletal disorders to the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development? What do you think? Put it in the chat, yes or no. If someone develops a musculoskeletal disorder, do you need to report this to the ministry, province of Ontario? Well, sure thing. Is the height of the worker? Yeah, height of the worker becomes super relevant. I am 5'2". Sarah, you're what? 5'8", 5'9"?
Nailed it. 5'8", yeah.
5'8", yeah. And the two of us, you put us doing the same task, it's going to be a different world for me than it is for Sarah.
Absolutely.
Depends on severity. Absolutely, Valen. Yeah, so there's some people are saying yes, some people are saying no, and the answer is maybe. You may need to report these. Now, what triggers the need to report? If a person is disabled from performing his or her usual work on the day after the injury reports, that's their next shift. If it's a Friday and then they're back on Monday, that's not a lost time injury. But if they are disabled from performing their work and an inspector has required your organization to report every disabling injury, then you have to report within 4 days to the ministry in writing. Now, how do you know if your local inspector requires this? They would tell you, and your organization would probably receive a requirement from the ministry. But you would have something in writing from your local ministry inspector, usually because they are coming to your organization frequently, they're noting that you're having health and safety issues, and they're really looking to ensure that they have a full account of what's going on. Or perhaps you have previously not reported injuries. There are a number of reasons that your inspector may require this. It's not often that a ministry inspector does, but if you've received a requirement to report every disabling injury, then yes, you would need to report. Otherwise, no, you don't. Do you need to report your MSDs to your JHSC, Joint Health and Safety Committee? What do you think? Yeah, if it leads to a critical injury, MSDs generally don't lead to critical injuries because when you look at that definition of critical injury, it's very focused on traumatic injuries. So MSDs tend not to be life-threatening. They tend not to lead to unconsciousness. They are not resulting in or from broken bones, and a lot of were amputations. It's a lot of what's listed in the critical injury definition. You're not dealing with burns. You're not dealing with loss of sight in an eye. And so MSDs generally are not critical injuries. And so when people think reporting, they think critical injury. How do I get to know who my local inspector is if I'm not sure if my workplace has had any contact with their local inspector? That's a great question. You could call the ministry if you really want to. I probably wouldn't. If your local, every workplace is inside someone's geographical territory. If you haven't met your local inspector yet, they may just not have made their way to you yet. And in which case I would just sit tight, hang out, and you will likely meet them at some point in the future. They also do periodically change territories. So if you, for instance, have gotten to know your inspector over a long period of time, perhaps that person moves into another role or they move to another territory. So they do change. But the way you would get to know them is when they show up to your workplace. Welcome. So in good culture, Caitlin says, in a good culture, yes, any injury should be. Dana, I agree with you. Lots of people are saying yes, and this one is, of course, a yes. Now, in Ontario, the employer is required to provide the committee or health and safety representative with the results of a report respecting occupational health and safety that's in an employer's possession. And if you are reporting an injury, musculoskeletal disorder is an injury, these are reports that are to be provided to the JHSC. So for those who said yes, absolutely yes. And in any good culture, Absolutely. Every single incident should be reported to the WSIB, including near misses. In a great culture, you don't just learn from the injuries you're having, you learn from the injuries that could have been. So let's talk now about collecting information. There are three key sources of information. There's the scene itself, there's the people, and there are the documents. And this is true for every type of investigation that you do. But when we look at what we're tracking at the scene, the information that we're gathering, often in MSD type situations, we're looking at things like the weights and dimensions of objects. We're looking at taking photos of postures, of the actual task, of, if someone has to be working in a space restricted area where they just have difficulty moving their body. Get a photo of that. Show how small that space really is in relation to another person. A photo is worth 1,000 words in, an incident investigation is worth 1,000 words in the world of ergonomists as well, because it just gives you so much information about the mechanics of what's happening. We also want to pay attention to paths of travel. I've seen lots of places where they say, okay, well, you should use a cart. And then the person will get to a certain point, and then there are stairs, and then they have to hand bomb everything off the cart and move it down the stairs. And your policy might say one thing, but your literal building is saying something totally different. We want to talk to the people involved. Usually starting with the worker themselves who's reporting that musculoskeletal disorder, gathering information about that pain onset, not just the time of the onset, but when we talk to pain. And when I'm not working, I am a ski patroller. I spend a lot of my time having conversations about pain. The acronym that you can use for pain is OPQRST. So O stands for onset, not necessarily the time of the onset, that's the T, but I want to know what caused the onset of the pain. And for MSDs, that can be a tricky one. It may be a particular task that they're doing, but we want to get a sense of, then there's P, what provokes your pain? When I'm talking to folks that have more orthopedic injuries, usually it's moving the limb. But for musculoskeletal disorders, the P often stands for what tasks or activities provoke your pain or provoke your other symptoms like numbness, tingling, heaviness, or weakness. Q is quality. Is it throbby? Is it stabby? Is it, we talked to R, is it radiating? So you might have pain that is in your forearm, but it's actually radiating up into your bicep. That's a great question to ask. We want to talk about severity. So 0 being no pain, 10 being the most pain you've ever been in. How much pain are you in sort of at rest? How much pain are you in when you do the task that aggravates this? What level of pain are you in at the end of the day? What pain are you in when you go to sleep? What level of pain are you in when you start the day? When I look at sort of like the stage 2 to stage 3, one of the things that I really distinguish between the two of them is in stage 2, you may be going to sleep in pain. In stage 3, you're often waking up in pain. You're having pain even before your day has begun, even before the tasks have begun. We also, and what does the T stand for? It stands for time. So when did this start? And it may be days, weeks, months that they've been feeling these symptoms. And you can use this not just for pain specifically, OPQRST, but you could use it for symptoms of MSD overall to get a sense of provocation, time, severity, etc. One thing we really want to avoid are questions of blame. Sometimes what will happen when we start talking to people is we just say, well, did you use the safe lifting practice? And that immediately starts thinking, well, it must be the worker's fault. Or we start drilling them about the other things that they do outside of work. Oh, do you rock climb? Oh, do you like to cook? Oh, maybe this is just from chopping onions because you like to cook. Again, we're not so much looking to dig into someone's personal life and minimize the pain or suffering that they're experiencing. We're trying to figure out what work-related factors may in fact be contributing to this to make them better. If we are at the scene and the person is physically able and capable to do this, if you've got someone with a back injury, do not have them do this. But if they are looking to demonstrate a task, have them demonstrate the task without load, without gripping, without having to do those provoking movements. to get a sense of how they were doing the task, or to get a sense of how this task is done. Oftentimes we have what we say we do and what we actually do, and when they don't match, it may be because we're setting our staff up not to be successful. You say you're supposed to be using this tool, but they don't have that tool. Or they say they're supposed to be using that tool, but it doesn't fit them. I'm 5'2", and I get a lot of issues where I was like, well, this would work for someone who's 5'8", but it won't work for me. So we want to get as much information from the people about what's going on, what's provoked it, what started it, and we also want to look at our internal documents. And for MSDs, this is one we sometimes don't think to draw on. It's things like box weights, ergonomic policies, safe work practices, that physical demands analysis that Sarah was speaking about. Internal standards being a big one. We'll talk a little bit more about how our internal standards at WSPS changed as a result of an investigation that we did. All right, Sarah. We've got our core four: awkward postures, duration, repetition, and force. Tell me a little bit more about awkward postures.
Yeah, so awkward postures is anything that pulls you outside of neutral. So neutral, for those of you who are familiar with medical textbooks, you've often seen a naked Da Vinci standing in a circle on the front in a very basically relaxed posture, thumbs out. With that, everything that we do in a day-to-day work world is trying to get us from an ergonomic perspective back to a very neutral posture. So what are the tasks that are pulling us outside of that? Anything awkward that's getting us away from that neutral posture, our muscles are having to work a little bit harder, our joints are having to stretch a little bit further, ligaments, all of the things. So some of that is good. It's not that we want you to be completely stationary throughout the day, but it just means that we want to minimize the frequency of those awkward postures.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've had a great question in the chat. What or when to report for employees that go for physio as preventative? And sometimes the physio then tells them to report, to their, report to their, I think it says employee, I don't know if it's employer, when it's deemed no improvement at stage 2 or 3. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure on the full background, but I'm thinking it's probably that the employee goes for regular preventative treatments, which isn't a bad thing. A lot of times we see that with folks who have had a history of injury before, and it's just a prevention to try and, dissuade that injury from coming back. We're of the mindset that if there's anything going on, report it as soon as possible, whether that's the physio doing that or the employee doing that, right? So just having that open line of communication. And then, of course, if there is something profound that the physio finds, communicating that back via Form 8 or what have you, depending on the stage of injury.
I think one of the big challenges was when it comes to preventative versus treatment, it may be that person is in a stage 1 and they feel like they're being preventative, but actually they're receiving treatment.
Right.
And so that can be a really tough one to pick out. It can also be challenging if someone has activities that they're doing. I mean, skiing is a good example for me because I do so much of it. But, if I'm getting physio, and right now I am, in my case, it's not for stuff that's caused by work, but because it is very much unrelated to my job duties here at WSPS. But if I were, a rock climber and I'm also getting tennis elbow, like, is it from my desk? Is it not? One of the things that you bring up is if someone's getting treatment and maybe they've stopped rock climbing, and I'll use that as a good example, but they're not getting any better. It may be because the actual core of the problem is related to their work. They're still doing all of those work-related tasks that are either aggravating an existing injury or contributing to the injury. And if they don't change up those work tasks, they're not going to get better. Yeah, does WSIB cover physio or chiropractor? Every claim is its own special flower with its own particulars. I like to say, flower or snowflake. And WSIB will cover the treatments that it deems will benefit for that particular injury if they deem that injury to be work-related and compensable. They do cover physio. I don't know about chiropractor. but physio for sure, because I've had it and it was covered by WSIB. They will cover a lot of different types of treatments. When I crushed my right foot, one of the treatments that they covered for me was nursing foot care. That is, in fact, how I got into health and safety, was I suffered a crush injury to my right foot. They actually paid for nursing foot care for my foot, which was outside of the formulary, but I was able to, in fact, get them to cover it so that my toenail would actually grow back, like, properly. It was a little bit out of the ordinary, but it was one of those things that really helped me a lot. So long as, and what does they, yeah. Oh, they do cover chiro. I've never gone for chiropractic, so I wouldn't know, but they won't cover physio and chiro at the same time. Interesting. Cool, Stephanie. This is why I love the sort of, like Hive approach here at the Safety Connection is, I've never been through that, and it sounds like Stephanie has. Either from the employer side, personal side, I won't ask, but that's really good to know. When it comes to duration, this is all about the length of the task. If you're hucking boxes for 8 hours, that's a long task duration. If you move one box, that's not a long task duration. So we really want to think about, and not just task, but also things like grip hold. If I'm having to like grip something and let it go, that's a very different situation than having to grip and then hold it and keep those muscles contracted for a long period of time. Sarah, tell us more about repetition.
Yeah, so repetition is really just the repeating of the task over and over. And again, it's often combined in link with duration. So how many times is the task being repeated? That could be from a cycle standpoint. If you're more on the industrial side, it could be as simple as how often are you repeatedly mousing or typing throughout the day on the office side, and taking a look at that in combination with your duration. So do you have the breaks? Do you have the body breaks to, refresh the muscles? Even the duration of staring at a monitor all day is a factor. And then lastly, force, I mentioned it a little bit earlier too, but it's just the sheer force of whatever you're doing at the time, whether that's your body weight, whether that's the box that you're lifting, all of it comes into play.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we have other factors as well that contribute, things like the organization of the work. If I have to, like, I start here, vibration for sure. That's one of the things that it falls into work environment. If there's vibration or vibrating tools. One that's interesting is, if I have to walk, I pick apples here, I walk all the way over there to pick bananas, and I come back here for cantaloupe. Like, why? That's not smart. We need to work smart, not hard. There are psychosocial factors like rushing. I see this really frequently in warehouses, by the way, where they're like, oh, if you like exceed your quota, we'll put your name in for like a draw for a free television. And I was like, it's not actually going to make people safer. It's just going to make them work faster and increase your risk of MSDs. Like, whatever that TV costs you, it's going to cost you hundreds of times more in what's inevitably going to result in a bunch of medical and lost time claims. 0 out of 10, do not recommend. There's also the those individual factors, height, stature, previous injury, that all contribute as well. So let's talk about contributing factors now and the types of information that we're looking to as we're thinking together. When we're thinking about gathering information, you'll see the slide a few other times, we're trying to gather information about what people do or don't do, the decisions they make, and the actions that they took. People decisions are all about individual people. Process, I like to think of more as organizational decisions. So get a sense of what they're doing and why they're doing it. Remember, no one makes a decision in a vacuum. They're making a decision in the context of everything else that's going on, both the things the organization set them up for, in terms of equipment, materials, environment, and process, but also organizational decisions that maybe were not the best. We want to get a sense of what equipment or material is involved for equipment. Is it maintained? Is it adequate? Do they have enough of it? Is it the right equipment? Does it fit them properly? For material factors, we want to get information about those dimensions: bulky, weight, is it awkward, does it have handles, is it a shifting load? So we want to get a sense of exactly what they're moving, and again, on aggregate, if it's something that comes on over time. For environment factors, we want to think about the physical environment. So flooring surfaces, widths of doors, locations of stairs. Maybe you can't get the cart through the door. Maybe this parking lot is snowy and so you're having to push the cart really hard. Those are all environmental factors to look for. And there are process factors. These are repetitive or monotonous tasks. We also want to look at organizational decisions where maybe you're understaffed and somebody doesn't have another person around to do a team lift. Maybe this individual's working overtime, so they already spent 8 hours, hucking boxes, and now they're hucking more boxes in that, the back end of an overtime shift. Perhaps in an office situation, you're working toward an end of fiscal deadline, and this person is working 12, 15 hours a day, typing at a keyboard, for instance. All of that is going to add up. So those are things that we should really be looking for. And I know for us at WSPS, we had a spate of back injuries reported to us maybe 5 years ago, and I was on the investigation team. Of the things that we found, the very first thing that came up in the phone call, and I was a little bit surprised, was like, okay, let's get off the blame train. Was they said, well, we give our staff a cart, so and the people aren't using it, we should just tell all of our staff to use the cart. I thought, okay, blame train, big blame train. But things got more interesting as I said, okay, well, let's talk about the cart. The cart itself weighs 17 pounds, which I find heavy and cumbersome to use. And if I only have one box, and it's a small box, I'm going to actually be lifting more weight to lift the cart than I am to lift the box. So I'm going to make a decision based on what's really going on. But what's interesting is, when do people choose not to use the cart? Most of the time when we spoke to staff about why they choose not to use their cart, the answers were really simple. And they were environmental factors. I would go to facilities with stairs or snowy parking lots or gravel, and the cart's just not going to help me. Our boxes at the time were single-walled boxes without handles. And what's interesting about that is we've actually changed our boxes since, specifically because of those reported injuries. The material is also coming frequently in poor condition. While I don't think the Purolator people roll up to my house, like just start to creep in front of my house and just pitch the stuff across the lawn, that is what it appeared was happening to the boxes, because they were arriving routinely split open, missing things. So we couldn't really trust what we were getting. I know, yeah, Ace Ventura style. Like, I watched them. I can see the Purolator truck from my desk, and I know that they stop and take the boxes out and put them on my front step. I don't know where they're getting thrown, but it looks like somebody is playing football with them. And so we ended up moving to a double-walled box with handles, and my stuff arrives in beautiful condition every single time. It's great. We also really looked at our process, because our process was actually driving people factors. I can make a decision whether I have my materials for my training classes shipped to my house or shipped to the customer. And when you can't rely on what you're getting, you always have them shipped to your house. So you don't get 3 participant guides and 20 green books, or in a lot of cases, 25 participant guides and 3 green books. But what was happening that was causing this? We were picking each piece of material individually. And instead, we decided to stuff it all into Ziploc bags. So when our staff picking go and they just pick the bags. You get a bag, it has everything you need. If the box is damaged, all the stuff stays in the bag. It doesn't get wet, it doesn't get damaged. And so over time, those of us that actually do the work, I was getting consistently proper stuff. It was arriving in great condition, and it's been happening for years. So now I actually make a different people decision. I have my stuff shipped to the customer, because I can rely that it's going to arrive, and it's going to arrive in great condition every single time. That is the power of PEMAP, and really figuring out why your problems are happening. Do you actually use PEMAP? Tell me in the poll. All right. So 38% say they sometimes use it. 6% say they use it all the time. They love it. 30% says this is their first time seeing PEMAP. So this is a great learning opportunity and a great takeaway. It's really about learning the backstory behind why your incidents are taking place. So when we think about your challenges to using PEMAP, for those of you that love it, you love it. But for those of you that are struggling, if it's your first time, that's totally fair, right? For those of you that are using it, what do you think your biggest challenge is with using it? All right. Yeah, interesting. People, that's the one that's coming up the most and struggling to know the difference between some of the various categories. When it comes to people factors, one of the hardest parts is to avoid blame. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually go and do the people last. That's one of the things that I can do to sort of really focus in on the why. But I really try to remember that no one makes an unsafe decision in a vacuum. And I say, okay, even if somebody didn't follow the safe lifting procedures, most people don't want to be in pain. So what prompted them to make the decisions that they did, and how can we build a better system around individual decision making? Because the better the system is, the more likely it is the individual is going to be set up to be successful. So, Sarah, tell us a little bit more about some of the people factors.
Yeah, perfect. So let's zoom in a little bit on each of these 5 PEMET factors. So ergonomics, one of the things I love so much about it is we can have the same environment, we can have the same workplace, but we can have 16 different people within that workplace looking at everything very differently and experiencing it differently. And a lot of times that's just because of who we are as people, right? We've already talked about stature and height. Something as simple as our wingspan, our reach capacity. There was a really awesome study that came out from the CSA group recently, if any of you have seen it, on the experiences that women have had with PPE and simply the fit of personal protective equipment for them and the ripple effects, right? Very, very similar when we talk about that. So it's about how each of us kind of fit within these environments and respecting our physical limitations. Something as simple as hand dominancy. If you're a left-handed person and you're using a right-hand pair of scissors, there's some implications to that, right? Sometimes that simply can put us more at risk because we're having to adapt our musculature and our mechanics to fit in. Psychological hazards, just like stress, for example. You've probably all noticed yourselves over the years if you've had stress, that kind of physical sensation that happens that you experience. It's that tension in your muscles, right? There's a very strong correlation to an increase in stress and an increase in your risk of MSDs. I like to think of it as kind of working outside in the cold, right? You have that kind of tension naturally in your muscles, very, very similar when you're stressed. Work behavior and change management. So maybe you have had some training on safe lifting and maybe each worker isn't responding to those mechanics the same way. Or maybe you've really preached in your office environment that you want folks to take a quick body break at the end of every hour of computer work, right? There's a little bit of an employee onus on this as well to take some of these principles that have been taught and actually use them effectively, right? So again, encouraging that in your culture. And part of that is also the supervisory aspect to that. So do you have someone kind of checking in with staff? Do you have these safety talks, these reminders, all key pieces? When we switch over to the equipment side of things, we have, again, these 2 different environments that we're kind of paralleling here. So again, we talked a little bit about tools, the fit, the adjustability, fork trucks, if that's a common piece in your work environment, a lot of different, hopefully, options to adjust on the fork trucks. They might expose the workers to vibration. They may have adjustments for the seat, forward, backwards, up, down. They might have some additional lumbar support. Is the seat able to swivel to help with reducing neck cranking? Do they have additional mirrors to ensure proper visibility? All key things, again, coming back to just the equipment piece itself. Carts, dollies, manual equipment that's available. What's the maintenance program? What do the tires look like? What do the treads look like? Is the tire size fit for the material that's being moved? Wrapping stations, all of that, again, the equipment piece. In terms of an office environment, so furniture, right? We talked about Tova and I, for example, working at the same workstation. Well, we're going to have very different needs in terms of height. Imagine someone who's 6'4", for example, they're going to have an even taller desk requirement than ourselves. I could spend an entire session, and I have, talking about the chairs, adjustability, and the things that we each individually need out of them. But that's a great example of your equipment working for you and sometimes against you. Input and output. So what do your accessory items look like, right? What does your keyboard, your mouse, your monitors or monitor look like? Do you have adjustability? Do you not? We talk about this a lot right now for those of you who are in the hybrid working world of working back and forth between a home office and a main office. Big switch, especially here in Ottawa with the federal workforce that we have, to bringing staff back to the office in a hotel environment. Many pros to that, but also the cons of, if you don't have that hotel workstation set up for a variety of workers, in some cases, it makes it very, very difficult to do what you need to do with the right fit of that workstation. Okay, in terms of material, again, in our two different environments, this is often, I find, the tricky part when we're looking at PEMEP for MSDs, because you really need to get into the details. And a lot of times, like in the office, for example, we're not necessarily lifting and working with material the same way. But from a manual material handling aspect, if we think of a very simple example of a box, what does that box look like? Like Tova explained earlier, does it have handles? Is it awkward? Are you in like a landscape environment, for example, where you're lifting a lot of shifting bags of soil, of sand? What's the body positioning in relation to the material that's being lifted or moved? In the office environment, it's, looking at how the worker handles those materials. Do they have to access a box of paper and refill the ink, or ink cartridges and paper on the printer? Are they receiving any mail shipments, stuff like that? And then again, that hybrid work piece. So a big kind of trend or buzz thing that I'm talking with a lot of employers and employees right now is, it's not so awesome traveling back and forth between the office environments, and now having to find a good solution to carry these pieces of material, right? All factors. When we talk about the environment piece of PEMEP, so really, again, as Tova alluded to in the poll earlier, there's not a ton when we think about MSDs and environment, right? We've talked about the hot and cold, and we all know how our body responds differently. But again, does that building environment offer you the option to maybe use some of the helpful equipment like a cart? Or is it now too hard to get that cart through the doorway, for example? Do you have stairs and no elevators? Right? So thinking a lot about the environment, especially when you're looking at bringing in controls, is really, really key. Another piece that I can't drive home enough is the housekeeping, right? Because if you have all the great equipment set up to help you do something a bit more safely in the workplace, you want to make sure that you don't have extension cords across your line of travel, or you're, trying to carry 16 things at once. In terms of the office environment, a big factor is the lighting. That would be, we're a bit more temperature controlled in the office. So we always want to look at your direct and indirect sources of glare, where your lights are coming from. Do you have blinds, curtains available? And again, going back to that housekeeping, maybe now on a little bit more of an individual standpoint, and how someone kind of manages their workstation to reduce that reach. And then last but not least is process, right, in our PEMEP. So again, on the MMH, manual material handling side, what's your culture like? Is it rushed? Is it production? Is it, heavy deadlines, timeline pressures? Again, do you have that maintenance program we spoke about for all these wonderful things that you bring in terms of equipment that's supposed to help the workers? Is it truly helping the workers? Are they still maintained properly? Again, tire treads, carts being able to push with less force. Maybe lack of physical demands or ergonomic analyses for tasks as well. task design, task rotation, job rotation, quality training. Are you having training at all? All of these process options or process factors are huge. Even when we look at safe lifting training, right? I see people that have been in their careers for 20, 30 years that sometimes still don't even know how to lift safely. And it's not about me coming in to tell them, you know what, you're not doing that right. It's, you know a lot about what you're doing. So let's marry that with what I know about the mechanics and put it together so that we can do this as effectively as possible, right? To reduce those injuries. In terms of the office, again, task scheduling, hoteling stations, we've talked about that. Simply being able to book that in advance is hugely helpful for folks. As well, being able to reserve based on what they need if they have some options as well. Prioritizing aesthetics or fun over function. So we've seen some of these, you know, cool tech spaces that are awesome to look at, but is it really realistic to sit in a beanbag chair for a 2-hour meeting or an exercise ball? And then again, last piece I just want to highlight is this bulk purchasing or standardizing equipment. So we have to remember about the earlier part of this PEMEP. We have people of a variety of factors, and we don't want to put a process of doing bulk purchasing and assume that that large purchase is going to fit every single worker, right? So again, process, people, it all goes together. And let's open up to discussion here quickly, folks. So just in the chat, if you don't mind,
share
share
some
some
short
of your...
on time.
Yeah,
a little short on time, so I think I'm gonna just move forward to talk about analyzing.
okay.
My apologies, folks. So let's talk about data analysis. We still want to think, and for those of you that have been in the health and safety world for a while, you're probably familiar with that incident causation model. What's interesting when we talk about that threshold limit is with MSDs, you can have, of course, those inadequate controls leading to underlying causes, immediate causes, and we have these, potential losses, and this is a continuum. And so we can have that muscle fatiguing, those tissues becoming more and more irritated, inflamed, what have you. And that threshold event, as we talked about, that finally tips you into, we definitely have harm here, that can be a bit of a trajectory to get to. And oftentimes this person is fairly far along in that stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 before they have that really threshold limit hit where they realize they go, okay, I really need to say something. What's interesting, though, is where I see this model as an incident causation model, I can also see it as a problem-solving model. And we, yeah. Oh, the cleaning staff. Yeah, if most folks had proper floor sinks in their janitor's closets. Sorry for sticking that here. You've got a point. I'm not gonna say otherwise. This is ultimately comes back to setting people up for success, right? Setting your cleaners up for success, but also setting your staff up for success. And by setting your cleaners up for success, you're often setting your staff up for success. We really want to focus as much as possible on our controls for MSDs in inadequate controls around systems, policies, processes, and compliance, rather than just focusing on those individual factors. And we want to get as high up the hierarchy of controls as possible. When we talk about retrain worker, we're still into that awareness administrative piece of it. As much as possible, as you're building and analyzing your data, you should be looking to see where your controls are now to hopefully get controls higher up on the hierarchy as you go. And multiple controls are really what you're looking for. Each one of these controls has pluses and minuses that also change over time. And where you have robust programs, they often have great engineering controls coupled with training, coupled with, established safe work practices and organizational standards, coupled with some adjustability and adaptability for staff. And so you've got multiple things going on to try to reduce that risk. And it's much less likely the more controls you have that, and the more different types of controls in terms of different places on the hierarchy, the more likely it is that you're actually going to have a successful control program. We want to think about our contributing factors so that we can then take these contributing factors and look for that analysis. You have to find the factors. You gather the information about the factors, you figure out which factors you have, and we talked about those factors, so that you can then use them in the controls step. And don't forget about your internal responsibility system. A great internal responsibility system has two basic ideas behind it. The first is you should try to solve your health and safety problems yourself before relying on the ministry or another regulator to force you to solve your problems. And the second is you have to work together to do it. With MSDs, there may be communication gaps. There may be gaps in understanding of the role of those various workplace parties. When we think about that employer, they may be more on the reporting side, but maybe they haven't built a great musculoskeletal disorder program or done some of those physical demands analyses that can really help guide your programs and controls proactively. Perhaps you have a supervisor who doesn't understand MSDs, doesn't understand the risk. Maybe they're encouraging staff to work in unsafe ways. It may be that they receive injury reports, but they don't really know how to investigate or how to respond. Or it may be that workers are feeling symptoms, don't feel comfortable coming to their manager because they've either been brushed off in the past or they don't feel like their manager is going to help them. It may be that they come to their manager and the supervisor feels stuck. They don't feel like they have employer support in building out a great musculoskeletal disorder problem. So you can have internal responsibility system issues that are actually manifesting as MSD problems. Then we develop recommendations, and for every single contributing factor you find, you need to be putting recommendations, one or more, in place for how you're going to make this better. I know this is being recorded and transcribed. Will this be available to us? I think they probably will be in the future, not immediately after, but into the future, probably yes. One of the biggest challenges that I see when I look at recommendations is organizations and individuals really getting stuck in limiting beliefs. Things like small changes are not going to make a big difference. It's just the way things are done around here. Recommending different equipment sounds too expensive. I'm not even going to recommend it because I know that my employer is going to say no. Things like a keg lifter in a restaurant. You want to know how much an average back injury costs? About $15,000. You want to know how much a keg lifter costs? About $3,000. You can buy 5 keg lifters for 1 back injury. Or you could go and have the back injury, spend the $15K, and then buy the keg lifter, and then you're out $18,000. Which one would you rather have? I would rather have the one that's the cheapest, and buying the keg lifter the first time is the cheapest option. But often, when we see $3,000, we don't factor in what the cost is going to be if we don't get that keg lifter. I've heard this one over and over again. We just don't have the space. So it's great that you want to get us this cool equipment, but it's just, we don't have space for this. But again, limiting beliefs. And if you're stuck in these limiting beliefs, you're not going to be building the best recommendations that you can. Welcome. Ultimately, the biggest belief that I want you to remember is that work shouldn't hurt. This is not normal. It's not normal to go to work and to be constantly in pain after. So how are we going to make it better? We use our contributing factors model to find our controls. If you notice there are people factors, how are we going to improve that individual decision making? Yes, retraining is going to be a piece of this, maybe, but only if your training is good and only if you do the other stuff too. If you're talking about right sizing, make sure that your stuff fits the people. Make sure that you respect individual limitations. I cannot lift a 50-pound box. I'm sorry, I can't. So if that's what my job requires, maybe I need to be in a different job, or maybe we need to find a different way to do this for somebody who's of smaller stature. I think about building a pallet 7 feet high. I can't do it. I'm just too short. Make your equipment safer. Provide ergonomic tools. And ergonomic means it fits the user, not I bought it and it said ergonomic in the description. Those are not the same thing. We also want to look at improving workstation designs, both in industrial and office environments. Use lifting devices, so really using our equipment to minimize human force. Change up our materials. Can we make it less bulky? Can we make it lighter? Can we make our handles better, as per what was happening to the discussion in the chat about the handle failures? Can we make it simpler to use? Can we use smaller containers? Can we palletize them where the pallet's actually shorter? For environment, how can we improve the workstation, the positioning, the housekeeping, installing ramps so you can actually use that cart when you have to go down a level change or an elevator? How are you going to improve the systems? Can we provide additional ergo and procurement standards? Can we prioritize safety metric instead of our production metrics, or at least make it clear that you are prioritizing the safety by not incentivizing unsafe operation? Can we change flawed task designs? I have seen more times than I can count people hucking bags of dog food over their heads, and I go, the task is broken. That's the problem here. It's not that there's anything wrong with the individual. The actual task is flawed. And then we want to go as high up the hierarchy as we possibly can. So if all of your controls that you have existing are just in administrative awareness, move up to engineering, substitution, or elimination. We want to help use our factors. If you have a force problem, you need force solutions. I don't know if any of you like Chappelle's show, but like modern problems require modern solutions. If you have task duration problems, you need to reduce the task duration. Find a way to do that. If you have repetition, how are you going to minimize the number of cycles? If you have posture problems, how are you going to improve the posture? Bring it closer to neutral. We really want to figure out what these factors are so that we can then take these and make great recommendations. What environmental changes can we make? How can we address those psychosocial factors? Those are the things we want to do. And I know, Sarah, this is a slide you were going to speak to, but we're just about done.
All good.
Yeah. I just want to recognize we are running a little bit over time. It is 12 almost. And so we're just going to finish up our last few slides for those of you that are able to stick around. We appreciate it. If you are, if you have to drop off, have a great day. Stay safe, have fun. Over to Sarah.
Awesome. So in terms of, more in the material handling environment again for our MSDs, talking about controls. Again, if we are doing a lot of lifting over shoulders, like Tova mentioned, how can we lower that? How can we bring that down? Looking at pallet height, looking at hydraulics if you have that. Changing how the actual pallets are stacked in many cases. Same thing with your racking, it's the exact same. For those objects that are quite heavy, over that 50-pound threshold, where can you implement team lifts? How can you implement a process where maybe you're alerting or notifying packages that might be a little bit larger, even if it's a big red sticker on it or something, to just preemptively notify staff. Looking at how your loads are actually boxed and bagged, maybe working with manufacturers where you have that relationship to change the actual load. Maybe it's a shifting load and we want to stabilize it. Maybe that's by adding the use of a cart or something else to help stabilize. When it's more on the unrealistic side of things, how can we reconsider? How can we have a brainstorming session to just eliminate some of these organizational factors that really have that production first mentality, right? And again, as Tova mentioned, incentivizing unsafe practices. We really want to eliminate that. From an office standpoint, we want to look as well at things that we can change there too. So next slide, Tova, if you don't mind.
Oh, my apologies.
No, that's okay.
It was like the office, the MSD. I was like, it's the right slide. It's not the right slide.
Yeah, all good. We talked about the stature, so your desk height, right? Something as simple as someone who's different heights are going to need a different height desk in order to access. Something as simple as maybe even just providing a footrest so that they can raise their seat height up. Chair armrests too wide. This is a common example, especially for my petite friends, where maybe the armrests are just simply way too far from their body. The seat pan is way too wide. So it's encouraging that kind of football posture when they're sitting in the chair, activating the shoulder joint when the armrest should actually be resting the arm instead of activating it. So looking at all the factors that come with the chair. The monitor height, again, looking at the option to maybe add an arm for full adjustability, sometimes even a simple riser, providing training, especially for those who maybe have different visual needs, right? Bifocal is going to magnify the content at the bottom of the lens, which often encourages that neck extension. So making sure that users are aware of where and how to look at that monitor. And we've talked about it to death, but that duration, right? Providing opportunities to get up, have body breaks. If they're in a call center, maybe it's a wireless headset so they can walk around on calls, or look at a sit-stand option.
Yeah, full disclosure, some of this I have worked in a contact center, and a lot of and I've also had tennis elbow from working at a desk. So a lot of I was like, yeah, let's filter it through that lens. And it's not an uncommon experience. When we talk about supporting strong recommendations, what information can we actually add to capture our employers' attention, Sarah?
Yeah, these are all great lists. These are live links, folks. So if you want to click on any of them, I super recommend it. If you need more of the legislative background, your industrial regs, your industrial establishment section 45, that's where we get into the material handling. On the flip side, for office, it falls under your general 25-2H, right? So just taking every precaution reasonable for the protection of a worker. But again, reminding that sometimes if needed to really just make this a priority. Currently, they're about to release the newest version of the CSA 1004. I'm also on the CSA Z412, which is also just being released for public review. So you should see both of those coming out at the end of 2024, I'm hoping, at the latest, on both workplace ergonomics and office ergonomics. So some big developments there. Great links on the ministry website. The MSD prevention guideline for Ontario, if you have not checked it out, please do. And of course, our website as well has some awesome resources for ergonomics.
So how can WSPS help you? We talk about following up and monitoring. Be sure that your employer, if you are on the JHSC, is actually responding to your recommendations within a legally mandated 21-day time frame. They don't have to fix the issue, but they have to respond to your written recommendation if it's a formal recommendation. We also want to ensure that recommendations are actually implemented. Go back, check with that worker, and then get their user experience. I love the term UX. It comes from the tech sector. Did we actually reduce the force involved or the repetition? Did we improve the posture? Did we minimize the duration? Do workers actually like this? Are workers more comfortable? Is the task easier? Happy workers tend to be more comfortable workers, and more comfortable workers also tend to be more productive workers. So if you're like, I don't want to invest in MSD prevention, this sounds like it's a lot of money, you will get that back in your staff just being able to focus on the work instead of their aches and pains. Have the changes created new hazards? We are going to very much be looking to see, maybe you put a control in place, maybe you move to fork trucks or a powered walkie instead of a hydraulic pallet jack. Now you have a powered piece of equipment. People need additional training. You may need, for instance, to have if you're using a powered walkie, that is considered to be a forklift. So now you need additional training. You may need some additional protocols around that. So be mindful of that. There's pro and con. Every control has its pluses and minuses. And feedback for users. Is the feedback good? If it's bad, you may need additional controls. And wrapping up, there are some great resources on our website. There's also msdprevention.com, which is the Center for Research Expertise in the Prevention of MSD in Ontario. There's a great ergonomics when using ladders Ministry of Labor guideline. All of this will be sent to you by our fantastic coordinator for safety connections, Emily. There's the Ministry's Guide to Office Ergonomics. There's also the WSPS Ergo Workstation Checklist. There's even PainPoint, which is a free ergonomic assessment app from OCAL, which is the Occupational Health Clinics for Ontario Workers. So lots of great resources that are available for free. We also have great news. Additional support to address material handling related hazards and risks. We are offering, this is funded by the ministry, we are offering material handling assessments that cover both manual material handling as well as pedestrian safety, lockout, machine safety, and racking and storage, along with traffic management. These are assessments that are no cost. So if you are interested in learning more in the province of Ontario, in any of the sectors we serve, about having an account manager and or health and safety consultant visit your site. We also have some Ask the Expert sessions specifically for this. Again, no cost. Resources available in up to 5 languages. This is probably the biggest ministry-funded project we've been a part of. It's incredibly exciting. We're here to help. It is calendar days. And there are some great resources available at no cost, including like a one-to-one service. So please avail yourself of this. We also have, of course, ergonomic consulting, which Sarah covers, and I'll pass this off to her, and then we'll finish off our session.
Yeah, absolutely. So office industrial, we see and do both. Again, we talked a lot at the beginning about the physical demands description, especially if you are seeing a lot of injuries and you're struggling with, we want this person to return. Where can we put them safely and happily? Big advocate for that. We also have cognitive demands description. So if you're noticing a little bit more psychological stress in your workplace, and again, just reviewing ergonomic programs or kickstarting an MSD prevention program, maybe for you folks. Training, we do safe lifting, manual material handling, conducting office ergonomic awareness sessions. So if you want to internally train some staff, which speaks really well to your IRS, your internal responsibility system, or simply just MSD awareness sessions. You want your staff to be aware of the different stages, the possible injuries they can encounter, how to report internally at your organization. So lots more information on all of that on our website, WSPS.ca, and some wonderful resources on our resources hub that we invite you to.
Terrific. All right, last question. What new ideas are you most excited to implement? It could be from any of these, or you can just put it in the chat. What are your key takeaways? What are some things that from this session you're like, wow, I think I'm going to do that differently? So far, a lot of folks are saying analyzing. Yeah, analyzing that data. Excellent. 66% say it's analyzing. We've got 11% who said it's responding. Still seeing some questions, some answers come in. Thank you so much for those of you that are still sticking around. I know we've got about 60 people here still on the program. We did lose a few folks, but for those of you that are still here, you're so welcome. Yeah, any great takeaways? Anything that you're like, wow, that is definitely going to be a takeaway for me, but something you're going to do differently when you go back to work, when you're doing these incident investigations. We're also here for questions. And for those of you that are dropping off, thank you so much for joining us for this fantastic Safety Connection session. If you do have questions about investigations, MSDs, feel free to put them in the chat. Sarah and I are still here. We're still taking questions until your questions are done. So if you do have a question, feel free to go ahead and ask. And thanks everyone for joining us. It was a fun morning. You're so welcome. What was the name of that free app for MSDS?
I think that's Pain Point by OCal.
Oh, okay. Yeah, for MSDs. It was Pain Point by OCal. You are so welcome. Can you set up training for office? Yes, we definitely can, Stacy. Yeah, feel free to reach out to.
If I'm not mistaken, I think Emily includes our contact info when she sends the list of resources. So yeah, please feel free to reach out if you have questions on that. For that one, you can just send it to me.
You're so welcome, Gavin. The fun thing is, if you come and take certification from me, this level of energy, it actually continues for the entire 5 days of the course.
Look out, yeah, look out.
You're like, oh my God, has
no
too many cups of coffee? The answer is no, I'm fully uncaffeinated. All right.
Let's do it. I love that. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for joining. Everyone. Thanks, Safety Connections. Stay tuned for other presenters. We have some other fantastic sessions coming up. We have some fantastic sessions coming up in our new fiscal year as well. At my work, most of the time, management will ask for an ergo assessment when an employee mentions any issues with their setup. Is that an appropriate first step? Because that's where we usually start. Sarah, what's your take?
I love this. Rachel, I'm going to make a quick guess that you might be a federal employee, and maybe just clarify that for me, because it does depend just a little bit when it comes to legislation. But yeah, it's good in the sense that, you know, at least they're not letting it fall through the cracks. They want that employee seen. But from a cost perspective, that's actually quite heavy. When you look at, when you look at an ergonomic assessment each time, there's the cost of the assessment and the cost of the recommendations. So that's where I personally am a really big fan of the conducting office ergonomics training, because you can then have a few key people, oftentimes on your health and safety team internally, that can kind of do some of that preventative, preemptive assessments to just have people seen. If it's something as simple as like a footrest, you know, to just raise their working height, why have to go through a full assessment for that? I'm not knocking it. I think that's a great thing for your employer to do. But if you have some internally trained staff who can answer some of those initial questions, it's great cost savings, and it really speaks again to that internal reliability system. I hope that helps, Rachel. But again, feel free to reach out if not.
One thing, my experience from the federal side, one of the challenges that I've seen is on the federal side of things was we had a really, where I worked at least, as a health and safety coordinator, we had a process where someone, if they were experiencing issues, they would have to, in order to get an ergo assessment, they would have to get a doctor's note in order to get the ergo assessment. And that I would really strongly discourage, especially how overburdened our healthcare system is right now. You should not need a worker to go to a doctor to bring back a piece of paper to go and get another piece of paper. That's a lot of extra work. It's adding extra cost as well. And at the end of the day, it's, you know, we also had you had to fill in an incident report in order to get an ergonomic assessment. So you'd come with your doctor's note, even though it was maybe a preventative. So definitely, oh, thank goodness. Yeah. That's fantastic. That's really good to know, because that's something that I would certainly discourage for any of you that are on the call that are thinking, yeah, that's our process. If somebody says, hey, I think I'm having problems, skip the doctor's note. I would not say the same though, in terms of symptoms. You really need to get to a doctor and figure out what's going on. If the doctor's note is just to get the ergo assessment, not to look for symptoms on what they're reporting, you're missing an opportunity there. Yes, doctor for symptoms, no doctors for just random notes.
Yeah. And also, Rachel, if you're 30 people, you probably don't want to, you know, have one of those 30 people trained. So maybe just having your onboarding training being a little bit more extensive if it isn't already, so that when staff start, they know exactly what to look for, how to set themselves up, and potentially, you know, report if anything does change in the future.
Sarah, I've got a quick question. Do you know if we're still offering our conducting office ergonomic assessments course in a public format? Because you could just buy, like for a smaller organization, buy a single seat. It wouldn't necessarily be federal legislation, just a heads up on that, but it would be just the basics of ergo, which is pretty much all the same, whether you're federal or provincial, except for the fact that in the federal world, you still have those employer duties to provide ergonomic tools. That's one of the key differences legislatively. But if that's something that we're still offering, you could have like 1 or 2 ergo champions from your small workplace, have them take the course, and they can do basic office ergonomic assessments that don't have anything, you know, unusual going on.
Yeah. Still offering it public and private. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So it's another great option for you to, as sort of a low cost option as well. Awesome. If that's it for questions, I think we're about to wrap. Thank you so much for joining us for SOAT Employee Reports at MSD. Now what? This has been a fantastic session of Safety Connection. Thanks to Sarah for being my other half on this.
Thanks, Tova. Did awesome. Thanks everyone for sticking around.
Bye.